Point Nepean is found on the very end of the Mornington Peninsula and makes up the southern side of the entrance to Port Phillip. It's an area packed with a long history of quarantine from disease and a long history of military use, but only sometimes in the same place. As a result, we can broadly divide the peninsula up into the disease end and the war end. So we start at the disease end. With immigration to Victoria rapidly increasing in the early 1850s after gold was discovered, establishing quarantine was a priority. Ships were overcrowded and outbreaks were common. In early 1852, work slowly started on the building of some facilities in the area, but something was about to rapidly change this. In November 1852, the Ticonderoga arrived at the Heads with 792 passengers on board, a significant overcrowding compared to her design capacity of 630. A typhus outbreak on board the ship had resulted in 100 deaths during the voyage, and had arrived here with almost 300 more ill on board. A quarantine station was needed, and needed in a hurry, and it was built here, first accommodating passengers in tents. The quarantine station was formally proclaimed in the Gazette very soon afterward, and the need for it was very much immediately justified. A memorial stands in dedication to the victims of this outbreak near where the buildings stand today. That said though, by 1860, only 10 years on, questions were being raised as to how necessary the station really was. With immigration slowing due to the gold rush subsiding, ships weren't as packed as they were. And after the Ticonderoga disaster and resulting press furore, double-decker ships were no longer used for passenger voyages, and strict regulations on the number of children permitted aboard a ship were reinstated. As well as this, ship operators paid better attention to onboard hygiene, as having their ship and crew tied up in quarantine cost them valuable time and hence profitability. An article published in the Argus of May 1860 stated, "The expense of keeping up such an establishment may be objected to, but if infectious disease did arrive and spread in this colony, the actual money expense of eradicating it would be much greater than the cost of maintaining the sanitary station. It certainly is a pity to see the establishment so little used, but there is great difficulty in making use of it in any other way, and at the same time keeping it available for its original purpose." A lesson which bears no relevance to today, right? Originating during the final months of the First World War, and spreading rapidly among military personnel, the cases were first found among soldiers in Fort Riley, Kansas, but it was dubbed the Spanish flu, mostly because the Spanish media were not subject to heavy wartime secrecy provisions, and hence provided most of the media coverage. 12 timber emergency huts were built to each accommodate 32 people, with the drawings drafted in March 1919 and contracts signed by April specifying the entire works to be done in only 5 weeks. But by 1950 it seemed the quarantine station was not being so well used, and the Army was granted permission to occupy parts of it on a temporary basis. Fortifications at the end of Point Nepean, we'll get down there later, were manned from well before World War I to the end of World War II, so the area was certainly no stranger to military use. The initial expectation was that the Army would eventually move elsewhere, but by 1954 776 acres of land were handed over to them for a nominal fee. By this time, air travel was significantly more popular, and the reduction in travel time reduced the need for quarantine. Subsequent occupation of the station was made by the Army School of Health from February 1986, but in 1998 they moved to Bonegilla near Wodonga. Shortly after this, the buildings housed several hundred refugees from Kosovo, offered asylum due to the conflict from the breakup of Yugoslavia. In June 2004, the care and management of the site was turned over to the Point Nepean Community Trust, before being passed to Parks Victoria for its inclusion in the Point Nepean National Park. Public access to the Point Nepean Cemetery was finally allowed, allowing family of the victims to actually visit their deceased relatives' graves for the first time. These are the only remaining parts of a jetty that was used here to unload cattle from ships, in a brief use in the 1880s of the quarantine station for quarantining some non-human arrivals. So that's the disease end of the peninsula done. Let's head down the peninsula and take a look at the war end, Fort Nepean. The gunner's cottage was the original master gunner's house, but little is known about exactly what it was used for. It is believed to have originally been built somewhere near Fort Pierce and relocated here in around the 50s while the site was still in military use. Once used to hold military personnel and their families, this area is quite busy now because it's the furthest point you can drive up Point Nepean before you have to walk, cycle or take a bus the rest of the way. In 1882, work began on the first permanent gun emplacement utilising the state-of-the-art in artillery. The disappearing gun had been perfected in the 1870s, and one of the gun pits was ready to receive a 6-inch gun, 2 more for 9.2-inch guns, and a replacement for an existing 9.2-inch gun was all being built. According to the Argus, the fort will be one of the best equipped in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, the Queenscliff local paper described Point Nepean's guns in 1889 as a family of dealers of death and destruction, but this is somewhat an exaggeration as they had not ever been fired in conflict at this point. But during World War I they'd see some action. In fact, what was quite possibly the first British shot of the war was fired right here. The German steamer Pfalz hurriedly left Victoria Dock on the 5th of August 1914 just before the war was officially declared, hoping to make a run for it. At Portsea, the vessel was ordered to stop by the SS Alvina, but since they had not heard of the outbreak of the war, they let it continue. A message was received at Fort Nepean that war had just been declared, and shortly after that an order arrived to stop the Pfalz. A warning shot was fired, and being sufficiently convinced that the next one wouldn't miss, the ship returned to port for the crew to be placed under arrest and the ship requisitioned. Fort Nepean was also later said to have fired the first British shot of World War II as well, but this time not at the enemy. The Waniora attempted to sail into Port Phillip Bay without stopping to identify herself, and a warning shot was fired. So down here we get to the machine shop, which handled engineering works and power generation. We'll now go back up over the top and walk back through the park.
So this is Cheviot Beach. On the 17th of December 1967, our Prime Minister Harold Holt decided to go for a quick swim before lunch. The beach was out of bounds to the general public, but special arrangement with the Department of Defence granted him access to it. He was accompanied by 4 friends at the time, and suddenly they realised they hadn't seen him again. This was the beach where we lost him. Some of you may also remember the second part of the story, where we then went on to name a swimming pool after him. The full story is somewhat unclear, but it is entirely possible in a manner that makes the story a little less interesting that the dedication of the swimming pool was already well underway at the time of his death rather than as a direct result of, but we all think the latter is a bit funnier.
We're walking back along the Range Area Walk, which borders the restricted access area. Over the years of military use, countless shots were fired over, from and onto this area, and not all of them went off when they hit. Currently 85 hectares of this is still to be cleared, but 25 of this likely never will be, because clearing the foliage to find any unexploded ordnance would cause way too much erosion.
That's all the tower you get.
That's the end of our visit to Point Nepean. It's an area of great views and great history, and it's worth the trip. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and see you next time.